We know that when we get people right, we get business right. So I'd like to welcome you back to my podcast that focuses on 3 areas I specialise in: leadership, performance, and culture. You'll hear my guests talking about their experiences and expertise, and will be providing thought-provoking insights around putting the human factor back into business. Each conversation will be accompanied by a free downloadable guide to save the strain on your memory, and resources that will make it easier to put the great ideas we discuss into action. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist, psychotherapist, and founder of It's Time for Change, and I thrive on conversations that make a difference. So reach out to me. My details are in the show notes along with the resources. Grab a cuppa, sit back, and enjoy. So I'm joined today by Dan Northover, CEO at Handcrafted, which is a brilliant organisation whose mission is to connect with excluded people in society and offer support, housing opportunities and training that can empower them to turn their lives around. And last year I worked with Dan, and I've invited him here today to discuss a very real need that many organisations recognise but don't necessarily respond to it in the most helpful way. And that's around supporting and developing managers. The default response is often to send them on standard training and to equip them with everything they need to know in their role. But what if that's not actually the case in terms of where the real issue sits? So today's conversation is going to be about exploring a different approach to developing this critical group of people. So Dan, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Lisa.
So what stood out about my work with you, Dan, was your decision to slow down before jumping straight into training. And there were a couple of things, or a few things that actually kind of jumped out for me. One was about you consciously created space for your managers to reflect on what the role actually requires, how they were feeling, what was getting in the way, and what their team needed from them. 4 questions that for me are like gold dust. They're the place that I tend to start. And you and I are very aligned on that, which is why working with you is absolutely fantastic. So tell me more about what made you pause before jumping straight in to traditional management training.
And so, yeah, there was one specific moment we had when we realized that it was the managers within our organization who were just taking on and absorbing a lot of the stress, a lot of the stretch. And actually we realized they were doing this much more than they thought they were. And so the context of that is that with the work we're doing, this charity was set up to try and work with some of the most excluded people in society, try and do something with and for people who have been written off by everyone else, who haven't been given the opportunity, who other people say, no, I'm not going to work with them, that's too difficult. And so we're so aware that on a day-to-day basis, we're asking our staff to go into quite difficult situations, to deal with very difficult behaviours, and to behave professionally and calm in a situation where often other people are in quite a lot of distress and are being quite unpleasant towards them sometimes. And we know that's something that takes a huge emotional toll on our staff, and we're asking a lot of our staff. So it's something we keep a really close eye on. And we had a team of managers who are really worried about their staff team, and would say to me, keep coming back to me, worried about the stress that staff were facing. And then one time we did a staff survey, which was really tailored to sort of pick at some of these issues and see what was going on. But the results came back really clearly that it was the managers who were actually facing quite a serious impact on their mental health and well-being, more than the frontline staff. But this wasn't what they had been telling me. And so we realized, actually, I think as an organization, we need to stop and reflect and work out what's going on here. And because actually, and say to managers, actually, the results are showing you've got some really happy staff, who feel really well supported, but this is having an impact. This is having an impact on you, and so actually some of these narratives that we have that we're using actually we need to take a step back.
Mm.
And so that's why it had to be a bit more of a sort of thoughtful process, I guess, to reset some of those narratives and think about, okay, what are you doing as a manager? What does it mean to be as a manager? How do we how do we move on from this? Because we have to really protect that there's really positive staff wellbeing scores that, like, we're getting positive feedback. We have to protect that really carefully whilst also putting the right support in place. So that was the context that we had where we sort of started that conversation
And
with
that's
you at that
exactly
point.
why I wanted you to come and talk to me today on this podcast, because
Yeah,
you've nailed it in terms of saying that you needed to really think about what was going on and what your managers needed, and unpick the reality of your situation. Data is everything, and whether it's speaking to people, that's one form of data, but then you went deeper and got the survey results, and it showed something very real, and actually that surprised you. And I think
yeah,
that in itself is a really valuable lesson that I hope listeners take away from this, in terms of don't take things at face value and challenge your assumptions about where the 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 real issues are. Because as you say, your people were very happy, and that came across from the survey results. So on the surface, you can look at it and go, well, people are really happy here. Let's crack on. We're doing things really well.
yeah,
But actually, the stress that your managers are carrying was pretty significant.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's and then I guess one of the things that we started looking at, wasn't it, was actually what impact is that going to start having on your team if you're starting to feel more stressed than you're showing up
Yeah.
exhausted and stressed. Like, how what impact is that start going to having? What are the risks of that? Like you say, because that we can't keep that going.
Yeah.
That we
Yeah.
this is going to unwind one way or another.
And that tension, I think I see play out in so many organizations, that tension between managers who are good. I mean, managers get a lot of flack for like not doing well enough, but actually the majority of managers I work with care deeply, and they
Yeah,
take on so much at their own expense. So they might have happy teams, but the cost
yeah,
for the managers is significant. And that, as you say, is not sustainable. And that's where, if you then start forward winding, it's not right in the current situation if someone's, feeling stressed and is struggling to have the boundaries and so on. But if you fast forward, that is just not sustainable practice. Those managers aren't going to be
yeah.
managing very well at all in the future.
Yeah, and that was absolutely what we had, because we absolutely have a team of managers who care deeply about their staff and about the mission and the work that we're doing. A lot of them have stepped up into their first management role that they've ever had, because they've joined the organization because they're really passionate about helping marginalized people and giving people opportunities that they might never have had before. They've stepped up to take on the responsibility of management because they've got that vision. They want to lead it forwards, and they care deeply about their team. Like, sometimes it costs themselves, and they're taking on board a lot of criticism. So actually, it was then really important to sort of to step back as a group of managers
Yeah.
and sort of recognize what people were doing, and but yeah, think together about actually, yeah, what what do we need to change to make this
Mm.
more healthy,
Yeah.
more sustainable, and
Yeah.
to look after you lot.
Yeah. And I love that, because it really shows your value for those managers. And I think a lot of organizations have a manager vacancy. They end up saying, right, you're now a manager, and it's almost like, just go and get on with it. And you've recognize that people are coming through who they might be their first management role, but even if it wasn't, they might have they might be basing their management style on unhealthy practices they've observed or they've experienced. And we tend, unless someone tells us or shows us a different way, we tend to show up in a way that is based on our own experience. So to have someone pressing pause and saying, actually, we recognize what you're doing is a really important role, we value you. So let's make it work for you as an individual, as well as your team, as well as the organization's needs. That's a really different approach to a lot of other organizations.
Yeah. And it was interesting. Then actually, what really landed was when you got people to think about um, what impact is this going to have on your team
Yeah.
if you show up feeling like this, because it's one thing to say to them, we're concerned about you, and for some of them they'll say, yeah, no, that's fine, I'll keep going, we'll sort it out, because very sort of, yeah, very motivated, very mission focused, very,
Mm,
but actually saying to people like, but think about, yeah, think about how's it going to feel for your team if you're showing up like this.
yeah.
That was actually really effective in sort of helping people to um yeah start to start to prioritize some of those actually like quite tricky changes that have then needed to be made to the way we work and the way we
Yeah.
manage.
Yeah, and I think that's the bit that probably stops a lot of people engaging this sort of work because it does require change, which isn't necessarily straightforward.
Yeah,
And that's like, oh, we can ask people what they think, but actually, if it means we've got to change things, that's it's a lot easier just to send someone on a training course and they come back and we don't have to change how we do things. Um, One of the biggest conversations we had, or like one of the kind of significant ones on when we're doing this work, was around the difference between leading people and managing people.
yeah.
So kind of we distinguished between those two roles. Why did that distinction feel important, Dan?
I think for me, I was aware that so many times you can do sort of management training, and there's a real focus on developing people as leaders. Um, and I I just felt really strongly that I had complete confidence in us as a group, as leaders,
Mm,
um, and the way people were driving forward, yeah, were driving forward the vision, had this like beautiful hands-on approach to leading, taking people with them. And actually, again, what the feedback we were getting is staff across the whole organization all consistently um, were really on board with the mission and the values. They felt connected to that. They felt part of the community. They felt supported. Um, and so basically, I was kind of concerned that sometimes training can talk about leadership, but actually, um, what we were missing was actually some of the more technical management skills, and actually that was another thing that I found really useful, and actually the thing that I think I want to keep coming back to and building on is actually saying like presenting that distinction to everyone and say this is what leadership is, this is what management is, and some of management is the sort of technical functional skills of allocating resources and those sort of things, which are areas that actually I do think, yeah, um, which we do need to be working on. And it's sometimes perhaps not what people first think of with the training course or what they want to get stuck into.
mm,
But yeah, for us, I think it was saying, right, you're clearly an effective, inspirational group of leaders.
yeah,
How can we get the technical day to day of yeah,
yeah,
of raters, resource allocation, difficult conversations, uh, processes. How can we be getting that right, and where's
yeah.
that slipping?
And I think that is a really important distinction to make. And as you say, you know, they're very inspirational. They're great at sense of setting direction and kind of the leadership part of their role. But I think sometimes unless we differentiate the kind of the hats that managers have to wear in terms of leading people and managing people, we have some managers who just end up blurring it all and trying to be everything all at once, or they ignore the bit that they aren't very good at or they don't like. So they end up just doing the leadership bit without kind of the management side, or they get stuck into the management side without inspiring and setting a sense of direction for their teams. And actually, it's important for managers, I think, to know when they need to inspire and sort of lead their teams and when they need to switch into a different mode, which, as you say, is much more around sort of it's about expectations and it's about responsibilities and it's about holding people to account and
Yeah.
kind of the day-to-day stuff, which if that's not in place, there is there's too much of a mess that people then can't stand back and lead because they're firefighting all the issues that come out of not having clear expectations and accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then that is again in the context that we're working, that is a tricky thing to work out and something that we're going to need to keep looking at is how how do you performance management in this sort of social care sector,
Yeah,
and when what your mission and your aim is, to connect with marginalized people, to give them the opportunities that are right for them to turn their own lives around. That's it's really hard to set an to have the metrics to keep people accountable um, for that sort of mission and those sort of aims. So it it is something that actually yeah that work is something that we really need to sort of zone in on and work quite hard at how we can do that effectively.
but I think that's another really good point, Dan, is that this is continuous. So I think
Yeah.
too many organizations fall into that trap of, well, they've been and done a workshop or a day or whatever on how to be accountable
Mm.
or how to set expectations or whatever it is, we can tick that off and now they can move on to something else. And the reality is, what's really important for managers is how they show up and how they are managing and leading other people. That's continuous development, if you like, because it's the nature of dealing with humans
Yeah.
ourselves who change depending on what we're experiencing, what pressures in life and so on, and the team we're organizing and the people we're working with in the community. There are so many changing variables that actually we need to keep coming back to the the key strands, the key principles of being a good manager, and how are we doing? Like, have we veered off a bit, or are we finding this a bit more challenging now because of a particular reason? Or actually, we really kind of gained confidence and skill in terms of managing people, but now I've lost my ability to inspire. Or and it's a constant, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that was, I there was some urgency about this, and that we were like some of our managers were reporting that they were really struggling. It was
Mm.
having an impact on them, but needing to be really sort of thoughtful and slow in some ways about protecting everything that's good and
Yeah,
having that balance to how how we make those changes without sort of losing
yeah,
um, what was so effective and successful before.
yeah. So I guess when we talk about leadership, the other thing that comes to mind is about how we lead ourselves. So when you think about how your managers were struggling because of the stress they were carrying, I was thinking earlier when you were talking about sort of their leadership side of things is actually quite good, and it was more about their management. What came to my mind then was actually about how we lead ourselves. And I think sometimes when we think about leadership, and it's about leadership leading other people. But I think there's also an important part of this, which is about how we lead ourselves. So that's about our own boundaries, and that's about knowing that how I'm doing and being self-aware and being able to recognize if my stress is too high and then what to do with that. And I guess so your managers who were good at leading other people, perhaps we needed to turn the dial up, and that's I think common for most people about that how they lead themselves and knowing what to do when that stress is high. And I think that was quite a big space that we spent time in, which again people wouldn't necessarily really think about in terms of manager training and how to manage people well, looking at and having a really good quality conversation around stress and the pressure and how that shows up in us and what the impact as you've already said.
So actually, some of what we then had to do was like quite difficult and daunting next steps, including so so some of it was the hard work of delegating the work that they've been absorbing themselves,
Mm,
and uh, and passing that on to other people, and then doing that process of sometimes difficult conversation, sometimes performance management of ensuring that those are followed up on and that there's accountability for other people doing it. Um, and yeah, and so that's difficult because you're saying to people we recognize that you're struggling, and now we've got a couple of really hard things that we want to we want you to do now. Um, but and that yeah, because actually, and that's the thing is leading yourself, looking after yourself. Sometimes the reason we don't do that well is following the path of least resistance, isn't it? And
yeah,
uh, it's actually easier if I just stay late and do this myself rather than explaining explaining to someone else how to do it and then
yeah,
making sure that they do it. And actually, and then yeah, and then the fear of actually if I'm asking them to do it and they can't, then do we have to broach the subject of maybe this isn't the right role after all? And so there's a lot of yeah, and so actually yeah, there's a lot of something quite daunting, quite fearful about some of those steps that then need to follow on from that in the name of like leading yourself and looking
mm,
after yourself.
mm,
Um, and yeah, and so that's yeah, so that was again something that was really helpful to take the time out and just acknowledge like we all need to go away and we need to do this. Don't want to.
yeah, yeah,
Not looking forward to it, but it needs to happen.
yeah. But you're leaning into the messy stuff. Working with people is messy, and I think people
Yeah,
try to simplify um, it all by kind of making it very black and white. We've got these
yeah,
processes in place, and therefore, if everyone just follows the process, we'll all be fine. And the reality is that when people are feeling stressed, and then we're asking them to do difficult things, like where you've got to, have challenging conversations with your team, and you've got to do, you've got to set expectations, and you've got to hold people to account, and um, that all requires a lot of self-regulation on the part of the managers. And also we know that when we're in a sort of high emotional arousal, when our stress levels are high, it impacts our judgment, it impacts our communication skills, our empathy, and everything else. So of course, we're asking people to go and do something really well that actually their brain is almost wired not to do well because they're working in this place of high emotional arousal. So there is a real tension. And as you say, it can unearth loads of stuff when you're having these conversations and you're realizing there are gaps in people's skills or their confidence or their capability one way or another. It's like, well, now what do we do with that? So I think leaning into the messiness of it and almost giving people permission to acknowledge this is really hard and it's really messy. And it's not a case of you have some training, you learn some new skills, you go away, you put them into place, and everything is singing, dancing straight away. It's like you go and put these skills or the self-awareness, whatever it is you're taking, you go and reflect on it, you do something with it, and then you realize, wow, I hadn't realized how big the problem is. And it creates a whole load of extra work. But as long as you're in it together and you've got
yeah,
you as the CEO driving that and you're leading that and you're creating the space and you're giving people permission to acknowledge this is really hard and I need some extra support, or I don't know, I've just realized this about my team or this about this person and they're not cut out to do the work I thought they were. And being able to have all those conversations rather than people internalizing it and then their stress just continuing to increase.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I suppose this is where I also like um yeah, have to call out my absolute own complete hypocrisy on this. Like I'm saying these things as if I'm not like the worst person in the room for doing exactly that. And yeah, and so I mean it's very much realizing that together because I've been a part of the organization since founding it in 2012, and it's grown very organically and started to grow into something more significant where we have layers of management and middle management, more and more middle management roles developing. Um, but actually, there is that approach
Mm,
approach I've had in driving forwards the charity and just like, oh, I'll cover the gaps, I'll fix that, I'll sort
mm,
that,
mm.
um, and assuming no one will know, no one will notice how like that I'm exhausted and that it won't affect other people, um, and yeah, and so um, yeah, and so actually, it's something that we all had to realize, and yeah, for me and some of the other senior leaders realizing that actually this is exactly what we're modeling,
Yeah.
and so we also then have to have an ongoing conversation about listening to where people say actually with with the team I've got, with the resource I've got, like I don't yeah, if you want us to sort
Mm,
of put all of this in place to have boundaries, have accountability, actually, we can't do everything that you're asking of us. This is what we can do.
yeah.
This is what we can't do. And that's part of what's come out of this is that yeah, so is that some of the managers have been empowered to then come back and sort of identify much more clearly what the boundaries are around what their team can
Mm,
deliver, what they can be responsible
mm,
for. Um, and yeah, and that's something which I and the other seniors have had to learn how, yeah,
yeah.
had to make sure that we're responsive to that. Because yeah, then on the other hand, if this is exactly what we've asked people to do and the feedback we've asked for, we can't then
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
be dismissive of that and then try and sort of bulldoze all of the plans through.
Yeah. You've got to be able to act on the feedback you're
Yeah,
getting. I think I was going to challenge you on you using your word hypocrisy because but then I was thinking, well, I'm hoping I can challenge you on it. So in terms of like you saying, you recognizing that, you set up Handcrafted because it's basically around a passion. It's around
yeah,
purpose and so on. And it's, as you say, it's grown organically. And I think it's so powerful. Like if more leaders did what you've just said you did in terms of showing your vulnerability, in terms of saying, actually, I'm not getting this right. I'm also caught in the same trap as you in terms of being exhausted and still trying to do everything and hoping no one notices. Because when you can communicate that and not wear this mask that so many senior leaders wear, which is like I'm supposed to be the perfect role model, and actually recognize you're a human who's also caught in this very real normal human trap, which is I want to do a really good job and I want to be everything to everyone, um, and we're one team. That there's that sense of being able to be very honest and take your mask off and say, I'm in the same place as you guys. There's no judgment. And I think the no judgment part is really, really critical because it means that people can show up how they need to show up and be very honest because you're role modeling that. So I guess the big question is, are you also
yeah.
changing?
So I think that's absolutely right, and that actually one of the things that I have learned to do is recognize where my own approach to leadership and management, what that was looking like to other people, what that was modeling, and the impact that was having. Um, and actually calling that out and starting the process of actively working through that and addressing that. And but also I think part of being real and honest with each other as managers, as a leadership team, is that this is a process that we're working through. Uh, um, we still are no less passionate about the mission, the vision of the organization. We still want to make things work. Um, and we want to protect that whilst we're putting changes that make it sustainable, and what we need.
I
There
think
we go.
also what you're describing is that this is firstly about us being is human, so it's continuous. I like the fact you've talked about the you're not perfect and you're quite open about the fact you're not because thank goodness you're a human being. If only more CEOs would recognize the fact that vulnerability is a good thing because it role models other people to talk about what's actually going on. And if you think back to the start of this conversation, we were talking about the importance of data. And for this, when we were working with your managers, we gather specific data from both the managers, but also their teams, so the people they manage, to find out what was needed
Yeah.
for the training and what they were experiencing. Why do you think it was important to get the feedback from the people that your managers manage to shape the development process? Because you're brilliantly sandwiching kind of, you've got information coming from the top down to your managers, but also you had information coming from the bottom up. Why were you so keen on doing that, Dan?
And yeah, and I think that's part of firstly being honest and vulnerable with each other, is that when we're talking about what we need to do, it's based on not just sort of book theory, but actually the reality of the feedback that we're getting, and what's actually happening within the organization. Um, but that also just seen that actually, yeah, we do need to be really careful that we're basing what we're doing on data, because otherwise sort of like narratives can creep in that people are sort of telling themselves about their work, or that they're hearing from their team, and we need to be checking that in against the reality. And I think that, like I said at the beginning, that was brought sharply into focus because we
Mm.
realized that um, we we'd been focusing on the well-being of a sort of frontline staff who then were reporting that they yeah they were more happy in their roles than the managers who were absorbing that stress. Um, so I think that's definitely the big learning to the ongoing commitment, that actually any training we're doing is sort of rooted in the reality of the feedback that we're getting, rather than sort of disappearing off on what might be an irrelevant tangent to what actually needs to be done.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because I think too many organizations define good management in isolation without actually asking people what they need. And which is why I don't, I don't think that standard management training on its own works because it's just too textbook rather than what specifically does this group of people need. And I think that's what you did really well in terms of finding that out. So I mean, I guess the downside of that actually is that the feedback can be uncomfortable, although it offers the real value. In terms of anyone listening to this conversation who's thinking about developing their managers in their organization, what would be your advice about where to start, Dan?
So yeah, actually, I think with the aim of getting to that point of having having a real vulnerable conversation that people can get on board with to commit to the continuous change that's needed. Um, I think it's by going out and collecting that data, asking those questions, and starting starting to ask potentially some of the working out what are the questions that potentially avoiding within the organization and asking those across the staff and getting the real feedback and doing that at the different levels. I think that was one thing that was really helpful is hearing the voice of the frontline staff, the middle management, and the senior leadership, and their perspective on actually some of the things that are those particular challenges and those difficult challenges, and getting uh, as the starting point on honest feedback on the difficult questions, and then actually basing any sort of interventions, any processes, any training that you're introducing on the reality of what's coming back from that feedback, rather than any sort of theory or approach in isolation from that.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. I think doing that means it highlights what skills are missing, um, where the clarity is missing, the support that's missing. It highlights all the gaps, as you say, and then that specifically tells people where they need to be going and what they need to be focusing on. But also, I should mention that in terms of the questions we asked your managers and we asked their teams, we also asked what people really appreciated and what people were doing well. And there was so
Yeah,
much that came out, which was actually really positive. I still remember actually when we fed
yeah,
that back, it was the managers' faces were like, "Oh, we thought this was going to be worse," whereas actually the feedback we got was
yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And actually, because actually, there you need to have that balance, don't you? Um, of understanding both what's going really well that we need to keep doing and keep protecting,
Yeah.
and where do we need to sort of step up and call out the real challenges of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if there was one shift that you would like leaders who are listening to this to make when they're thinking about their managers, what would that one shift be? So, just in terms of how they're thinking about it, how they're approaching it, just what's in their mind in terms of the managers in their organization, what's the one shift that you think this could make a big difference to organizations?
I think one generic shift which we've all made, and which I think would be helpful um is realizing like uh the impact of how you're showing up, whether you're aware of it or not. So actually to approach these things and lead from that position of vulnerability and honesty with on the base, because people are going to pick up anyway
Mm,
what's going on. So actually using that honesty and that vulnerability as a starting point, rather than trying to um, yeah sort of power on through that and mask that. But so starting from that, like leading from a position of honesty and vulnerability, I think.
I absolutely love that. For me, this conversation's really reinforced that development doesn't always have to start with teaching new skills, which is, I think, what people often fall into the trap of believing. And as you've just said, sometimes it's about creating the space for
Yeah.
people to be honest and to reflect and to kind of find the clarity to be able to shape what the development needs to be, and then being able to build it from that approach. Which is why when you said about handcrafted developing organically, I think it really fits with good development should be organic in terms of how that is shaped. Thank you, Dan, so very much today. Thank you also for persevering with the very dodgy Wi-Fi, that you get a gold star for trying really hard to keep switching.
Oh, thank you for your patience with that. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Dan. If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, there are three things I invite you to do. First, click the link in the show notes to download the resources for this episode. Secondly, help me extend the reach of this podcast by leaving a quick review on Apple or wherever you listen, and please share this episode with your colleagues so that you can discuss what resonates for your team. And finally, as usual, I invite you to reach out to me on LinkedIn or through my website so that we can keep the conversation flowing. I know listeners often say they're keen to implement some of the key takeaways, but find it tough without guidance or extra support. If that's you, drop me a line and let's chat. Be sure to check out itstimefforchange.co.uk, where you'll find a whole heap more to support you to reflect on and develop your own practice. And while you're there, join the Leadership Lens to stay up to date with bespoke support services like my retained partnerships, where I'm by your side through all things leadership, culture, and performance. Feel free to reach out if you want to know more. I'm a great sounding board for challenges and ideas for development, so grab all the details you need from the show notes. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and to welcoming you to my next episode coming soon. Join me then.